How's it going, guys? Clearly not in Brooklyn today. We got up early, beat the traffic. We're a couple hours out east in Long Island to see a very good friend of ours about a very special car. A car that deserves its own chapter in the history books, quite frankly. Today's episode of Alternate Side is going to be very special because we're going to give you the complete history on a car made entirely of plastic. All right, so I'm here with Joe Amendolia, the current steward of this beautiful car here that his father built, the 1966 TDX. Joe, why don't you tell us a little bit about the car here? Where did this come from?
Okay, well, my dad built this. We've got the design sketches. We'll take a look at them later, but he built this in the mid-'60s. The concept was he was in the plastics business. Plastics was coming on big in the 60s, and he wanted to show how strong plastics were. And his idea was to build a car with a modern V8 in it, a 283 Chevy V8, running gear, and have the frame, the structural part of the car, all reinforced fiberglass plastics. If you were to take a chainsaw, as I tell people, and cut the car in half, the only metal you'd hit is the drive shaft and the wiring. So this was his concept, and he knew the only way to get his idea across was to build it in 3-dimension, get it on the road, and drive it and show it around, which is what he did. He was in a couple of magazines. He got where he wanted with it, and he was on to other things. He was an inventor, and he always had ideas. He wrapped it up with plastic, put it in the woods for 30 years next to the house on the 2-acre property. When he was 89 years old, after I bugged him for the past 20 years before that, he said, on his 89th birthday, Joe, you can take the car and restore it. And my line to him was, Dad, I'm 65 and you're 89. What are you thinking? I spent a year just on and off putting the motor back in it, putting a 4-speed in it, and I even got it registered as a 1966 TDX, which stunned him.
So cool. One of one.
One of one.
Joe, this is a plastic unibody?
Plastic unibody.
No steel
No
frame
steel
rails, nothing.
frame, no steel reinforcement. Built much the way a lot of the formula cars are built today.
Right.
A lot of the race cars are built today, carbon fiber cars. If you open up the hood, you can see the structure underneath.
Wow.
He was not sure exactly how thick he had to make it, so he went overboard. A lot of places the fiberglass is a 1/2 inch thick. The firewall area, all this, the wheel wells. The suspension in the front is out of a 55 Chevy. It's cut and bonded in to the fiberglass down here. The rest of the car, the engine, the transmission at the time, and the rear axle came out of a 58 Chevy.
So to get to this point, what did your father start with? What did he do for a living, or what was his trade? This is not something anyone can do.
No, he was in the plastics business. He got involved in plastics when he was first married in the early 50s. He decided that he could make full-size plastic ice cream cones like you see in Dairy Queens and
big Carvels
cone, like that. And that led him into being able to work with fiberglass, seeing how shapeable and how good it was weather-wise and how strong it was. The go-karts and the small miniature car business started to go post-war, and the little quarter-midget race cars started to take off. He built a race car at the same time with a fiberglass body, steel chassis. Fiberglass is a dirty business. It's tough to get people that want to work for you. He always had the type of guy to working for him who basically was just pure labor. He wanted to get out of that. But as he was getting out of that, he wanted to prove a point about plastics and also have a showcase for some of his inventions. He had lots of different gauges and safety inventions for automobiles. So he decided, before he got fully out of the fiberglass business, he would build this.
Love here. Love here.
What motivated him to go to plastic instead of steel for the sake of the automobile? Weight or what?
He felt that things like the Corvette, which had fiberglass skin, over a metal chassis, it was kind of flimsy. If it got crashed, people would see the cracks and they'd see how it shattered, and they thought that was horrible. And he thought, no, the fiberglass part of it is very strong. Fiberglass fishing poles, fiberglass surfboards, they're strong.
Right.
Fiberglass boats were coming in at that time. And he wanted to show people how strong it was and how safe it was. So there's a lot of things in this car that are his concepts. All this is a fiberglass foam-filled fiberglass structure. There's a fiberglass foam-filled roll bar inside here.
Right.
The roof is cantilevered with no windshield posts, so you could see 180. So this car not only showed how strong fiberglass was, but also was to showcase his ideas. His idea is about no windshield posts. You could see right around. Down the center is the backbone of the car. That's also a fiberglass transmission tunnel kind of console. When you come around the back, there's it looks almost like the tube a carpet comes in, but it's wound fiberglass filament. And it's directed from about here, it's hidden behind here, and it's directed down in front of the rear axle. And what that was supposed to, he fooled around with rocketry too. That was going to house a rocket motor. That rocket thrust face forward. In a panic situation, you'd hit a button and it would stop the car instantly. His critics said, well, what happens if that rocket goes off in traffic? It'd get launched to the car behind you. So that didn't go. He never did it. So he used it as structure.
Right.
The back window is a flat sheet of plastic, one of his ideas, and it's bent around and put in a track
It's riveted up top.
with just screwed on top. I've had that in and out. It's got a Firestone safety cell in it, fuel cell that was just being introduced at that time. He got that for free from Firestone when he wrote to him, showed him what he was doing, as he did get a set of brand new wide ovals. They were red line wide oval Firestone tires with the newest thing on the market.
Pretty basic inside. There's no instruments, nothing.
Inside was never really finished. I think like most people that are full of ideas, the challenge is in building it and getting the concept in 3D. I don't think he was interested in that. He talked about it
Right.
a lot, but I don't think he was interested in that. I am somewhat creative, but probably a lot less than him. So what I learned from growing up with him was you need to finish some things. So when I started to get into restorations, I would restore things. I'd show it. I'd try to win awards with it. And then I would use it and enjoy it. But I always tried to get it to the next level. And that's what I'm going to try to do with this.
Right, because the motor
Over
in
the
it
next
now
few
is not
years.
the motor you mentioned earlier.
No, the original motor was out of the 58 Chevy with 200,000 miles on
So
it.
what's in there now?
And what's in there now is a 66 Chevelle motor that I sourced for him to replace the original 58 Chevy 283. Both 283s, both basically the same motor. And I wanted it to be date coded around the time the car was built.
Also a 66 motor.
Yeah. If he had had money at the time when he was building this, he would have put a 327 in it and a 4-speed and a Corvette independent rear suspension.
Right.
But that wasn't easy to do in 65,
Right,
64, things like that.
That budget too, yeah.
So he went with what he could afford to do. Now, the reason it's so cracked and patinaed is another one of his ideas. He tells a story about in the late 50s, he mixed up what was the equivalent to Bondo, maybe even before that. And he went around, he said, this is great, plastic filler, they're using lead now. He had cans, he had labels printed up. He went into a few body shops with it, showed him how it went with the hardener and things like that. He tells a story about how one old German guy literally grabbed him by the collar and threw him out of the shop. And while he was laying on the ground in front of the shop, he told him, I will never use that. I use lead. Get out of here. Later on in the 60s, when Bondo was around and other plastic fillers, they were very heavy. And he started fooling around with lightweight plastics, which they have plenty of now. So on this car, he dabbled in that lightweight plastic. He smeared it all over the car and shaved it and primed it and painted it. And as you can see, it did not hold up. The weather got under it and peeled it. So they have much better things today. So not all his ideas worked. They were great ideas, but they all didn't work. So that's why you see the car with the patina you see it on today. It got to a point where I could tell when he wanted to drive the car. Some people are patient and to the point where they'll make sure something's 100% finished before it goes out. He wanted to drive the car. When he went to put headlights in it, so he could make it legal, he pointed them and bonded them with fiberglass, so they're not adjustable at all. And I said to him, Dad, I could see it that by that time you wanted to drive the car.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah. And there were a lot of temporary things on it. The steering linkage. It's got a Sears socket set universal in it. The headlight covers, he molded out of Lexan, which they use today. But his idea was that they would stick out far enough and they were strong enough to be kind of a bit of a bumper in parking lots and things like that. So there would be no steel bumpers.
Yeah.
Lexan covers would be thick enough and heavy enough
That makes sense.
so they wouldn't damage the body. And that's kind of the shape they were. The back of the car is supposed to have a whole Lexan tail panel. I have it, but I don't think it's as pretty as the back of the car is now. It starts here, it's clear Lexan, and his idea was to have different colored lights in there, almost like they do with the modern LED cars.
Right, right, right.
When you were driving it, and accelerating, it might glow greenish, and then when you stopped, it would go back to red. When you were letting off the gas, it would go to yellow.
I mean, the body line finishes beautifully back here.
You know, it's amazing how symmetrical and how perfect this car is. He built it a half at a time, and you can see that from all the build photos. But I'm pretty impressed, and this is one guy that designed it, built it, and from some angles, it's absolutely beautiful. From other angles, not so beautiful. He was never happy with how, from a just straight side profile, how, like he said, how heavy it looked. And he always, in those days, he figured he'd put a racing stripe down under the rocking panel.
We know what it is too, is like, you know, in the era you had the clay models and you had many series of prototypes. This was one project car that came together in this form. So there's gonna be inconsistencies, but that's beautiful to this car.
It was neat watching it being built. I was probably about 13, 14 when he was building this, and I remember his shop was an old power building next to the railroad station. I remember seeing this upside down, and he had a couple of his guys applying layers of fiberglass to strengthen it. Because what he would do is he'd lay out all the structure, and then he'd ask his workmen to build up the thickness of it.
And the structure was what? He's using cardboard?
The structure, his trick was foam. He'd whittle things out of foam and cover them with glass, and then he'd also shape things like inner wheel wells and consoles out of corrugated cardboard. And he'd cover that with glass and then peel the cardboard out from behind it.
The shape of this car, like I have a 76Z, clearly derivative of the E-types and the Ferrari GTO. What did he admit to inspiring the shape and design of this car? Did he have any sort of direct inspirations of the era?
You know what? He liked Jaguar. He was a Corvette guy. He had a 53 Corvette, number 25, because he was into fiberglass. So he had his Corvette. So he liked the lines of the Stingray and stuff, although there's not too many lines from that. He was upset when the 68 Corvette came out. It looked a little bit too much like this. But the Cheetah
Someone was peeking in the window.
Yeah. The Cheetah looked a lot like this too. A lot of people mistake this for a Cheetah. The Chaparral race car, Jim Hall's Chaparral, had this same shape to it. He shaped that for downforce, although I've had people look at it and say at 100 miles an hour, this car will probably want to fly because it's not quite have the downforces in the places you want to see it. But no, there was nothing he copied. That was important to him. He did not want to make copies of this. He didn't want it to look like it would be mistaken for anything. And it never is mistaken for anything, even to this day.
It's its own beast for sure.
And when it's shiny, it shows off the unique lines even better.
So for all the R&D, how much did he drive it and enjoy? Dailied it?
In a summer day like today, he would take it out and take it to work, 50 miles each way. So it was a 100-mile trip a day, and he would take it all the time. When I was a kid in high school, I think in about 68, he must have dropped me off in high school in 69, and it was shiny and different. And,
What'd your friends say?
I was the head of the high school.
Oh, that's
dropped me off in front of the high school with it. Everybody knew my dad had built things and did things, but this was a shock. So he's starting to make money. He buys a piece of property, builds a brand new house. He's got this, he's got the business going, he's got the new house going. My mom had a third child on the way. So he's got everything going. But what he fails
to... A lot of irons in the fire.
A lot of irons in the fire, but what he fails to realize at the time is that it's a lot going, and you're going to a lot of new areas that you're not getting a steady paycheck every week for. So things were tricky.
So the labor of love went to a matter of pragmatism.
And in the back of his head, he's deciding, you know what? I don't need to manufacture anymore. I'm a designer, I can design and invent. So at the same time, within a couple of years, he's shutting down his manufacturing business. He's working out of his house, and he's going to design consulting and patenting things he's designing. He wanted me to go into the car. He didn't want me to go to college. He wanted me to go into car business with him. He wanted to build these. That was going to be it. At the time, he wanted to manufacture and build these in a custom way.
So he wanted to have like a plant almost.
Yeah.
He wanted to produced these.
Yeah, he
en
even
masse.
had a name for the car. The car would be called the Da Vinci, his car company. My mom was the one that had the strength to say, you know what? I got to go out to work so we can put groceries on the table while you're inventing, you know. And she did.
Woman ahead of her time.
She did. She went out and worked and put groceries on the table and gave us
Great.
lunch money for school while he was doing this.
So TDX, it stands for anything?
Two things. It stands for Technical Development Experimental. But my sister's nickname, her name was Patricia, and her nickname was TD. So he wanted to name, like Mercedes named the car after their daughter, he wanted to name a car after his daughter.
Cool.
So TD became the TDX. I hardly ever, in fact, I can't remember in the last year where I look at something on this car and go, gee, Dad, I wish, Dad, you were here to tell me about it. He told me so much about the car, and I knew him and the car so well and grew up with it that I kind of can channel him when I work on it and when I drive it. And that's a real good feeling, because so many times people in the family leave you something, and there's so many unanswered questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Even to the point where there was things on this car I thought I'd improve. And he had, well, he had the radiator, was one of the things in here that I was going to change and improve. And this comes up, he's laid the radiator down at almost a 45-degree angle. This hose was one. I said, well, this is crazy. This hose comes out, it's a flex hose, it goes through the chassis and back up here. After a few weeks of fooling with different things on and off, I put it back exactly the way he had it. I just got a new flexible hose. And I said, okay, that's why he did that. And the generator is up here because...
Through the hood scoop there,
this
yeah.
hood scoop, and you had to put the hood scoop on to clear the generator. And I was going to change that, but there is no room for the generator.
He thought of it all.
The only thing I did was put a 4-speed in it, and he fought me on that. And I said, Dad, you didn't have any money. If you had money, you would have put a 4-speed in it. He goes, you're right. I said, so I'm going to put your 4-speed in it. We got the engine and transmission out, and I put dual exhausts on it. And he swore to me you couldn't put dual exhausts on it. But I went to an exhaust shop, and we put them up and inside and tucked them into the tunnel. He had a single exhaust running on it. I was able to get the dual exhausts up. They're very low, and the muffler's very low on the back. He wasn't much longer for this earth. He was in the hospital, and I was going back and forth from the hospital. And at the same time, the muffler shop had the car. And the last time he was conscious in the hospital, I said to him, Dad, dual exhausts are on the car. And he just kind of looked at me kind of bleary-eyed and said, here. And I had gotten my sister's cell phone and recorded it. And I held it up to his ear, and he was in and out of consciousness, and he had a big smile across his face. I go, there's your dual exhaust system. It's up and running.
That's, oh my God.
And that was it.
Awesome.
He was gone the next day.
Tell me what you see.
So when you take this out, I mean, what's the reception? I mean, there's no way you get hassled in this. This is probably making everybody's day.
I don't get hassled in it. We've driven, usually have a car following us, a car in front of us, you know, but I don't take it out around the block to go to the grocery store yet. When I put lights in it, I will take it out to go to the grocery store. My biggest thing is to try to find a lens that's curved or have something made that's that kind of shape, because I kind of like that kind of shape for the back and even it up.
You all right to take it out today for a little bit?
Yeah, we'll take it out.
All right, you should do it.
Okay.
All right, so we're cooling off on the porch now after a ride out in the car. It's hot in there.
Very hot in that car. That's one thing with the exhaust running right through the transmission tunnel. No Dynamat in those days.
That's right.
No carpets in the car.
Right.
2 upholstered seats. And lots of holes where shifters are coming through and linkage.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I will say it tracks and rides nice and stiff, nice and tight. I mean, I was expecting like this like toy car plastic flex, but it's rigid. It's nice.
you know, it's different than other fiberglass bodied metal framed cars. I have a Myers Manx style dune buggy. Somebody asked me what it's like to drive. And that's a Volkswagen platform with a thin fiberglass body. And I said, it's like taking your riding lawnmower out on the highway. This is not like that. One of the things that always surprised my dad is how structurally stiff it is. And people thought it would sag because, you know, that cold flow tendency of plastic sometimes. And yes, the hood spread a little bit and the doors sagged because the hinges sagged, but the structure of the car is extremely stiff. And it ended up weighing more than he thought. He figured that thing would be well under 2,000 pounds. I think that car weighs about 2,300 pounds. He was very disappointed. But when you start putting together half-inch thick fiberglass for firewalls and structural suspension pieces and transmission tunnels, that's heavy weight.
Starts to add up.
Yeah, it weighs up.
Yeah, because even the way that, you know, you're hitting bumps and the suspension travel, it feels firm and planted. You know, the way it's bonded, I'm like, all right, I can see how that works conceptually, but then actually go for a ride felt really professional.
The
felt
suspension,
good.
the steering, the brakes, and everything like that, it all does what it's supposed to do. It's a fiberglass, you know, chassis that takes the torque of a big American V8. Nothing rattles and nothing falls off the car except for the gas cap that I left on the deck.
I mean, with all due respect, it exceeded my expectations.
Well,
honestly.
that's great.
It was very impressive.
You could imagine if a real professional kind of coach builder type guy got a hold of it. I remember in talking to the gentleman Rob Ida I talked to, I said, you know, what do you do here? There's no door latches, there's no hinges per se. He says, the hinges are fine, I'd leave them just like they are. Your father did a great deal bonding up these hinges. He goes, and door latches, that kind of stuff, that's all easy.
Yeah.
He says, all the hard work's done, don't fret.
No, we stayed in the car.
Yeah, we didn't fly out. And like I said, he used to go a 100-mile loop on that car on hot days like today and stay in it. Masking tape came in handy for taping things down that didn't have latches.
So before we went on a ride, I noticed you carrying around these marble notebooks.
Yes.
What's in these books?
So these I found in going through when, after he passed away, I knew he had stuff on the car and I knew my dad was a saver. Everything he ever did, he documented and saved. And I came across these in a filing cabinet. They're 2 salt and pepper notebooks dated from November '65 when he started the project up into '67. When you open them up, some of the first things that strike you is well, there's a concept design in here that he was a pretty darn good artist. So that's his concept design of what the car would look like, and it came pretty close to that. Within a month of starting this, he's got the basic shape and structure all done. I mean, from 11 to 12 early in the month. 6 weeks, he's already sketched exactly what he wants. He's talking about how he's making the molds and the waxing the molds and pulling the glass out. 11/9/65. I mean, this is only a few days later. He really jumped on this thing. And you can see the cars start to take shape.
Yeah.
And this picture, it almost looks like an old Porsche 928, 924. It really does. But and the lights are much higher in the fenders and things like that.
Right.
This is simplified, not rounded. All the basic concept of the structure, which is right there today, the transmission tunnel, the fiberglass overhead, the roll bar. Yeah, this is, I mean, you sat in that, and that's basically what it looks like.
100%,
And I'm laughing even down to the horizontal pleats, which, that's just coincidence.
This idea took off running in his mind.
You can see it's a 20-second. Possible simplest approach, build complete outer body pattern to bottom dividing flanges, allow for width, length. The body panels are separate from the car. There's a structure, and then he bonded these body panels on. And that's what he's starting to realize, that you're not going to just carve this and the inside is going to be the chassis and the outside is going to be the body. It's not the way it's going to work. There's going to have to be body panels glued onto a structure. This is corrugated cardboard and plywood inner for the inner shell. So he's building up the inner shell out of little cardboard and plywood when he needs it, and then covering it with fiberglass and then trying to remove whatever he could. This was the basic engine and chassis layout, or structural layout. Allow for muffler, center section.
What was he cross-referencing all of this to? He had access to these other specs on other models that he knew would fit into his plan, or he was coming across stuff?
I don't think so. He was building as he went along, like a lot of those guys did back then. You know, Big Daddy Roth and even Barris and the customer, they made sketches, but they kind of built. And he had some 3D models. I remember on the kitchen table, you know, he'd buy a model and take the wheels and the engine, or a big Corvette model, something like that, and he'd lay out cardboard and tape it together in place of the fiberglass structure. And then he probably went to this design, back and forth with the design catalog. But he really built as he went along. He'd sketch, go along, sketch. He had an idea in his head.
Yeah, but even to know what the geometry of what front end he wanted to use versus the design of the car.
That came first. He brainstormed that. Like I said, his building, we told the story of his building, was an old railroad station, powerhouse. So the railroad station was still there. The powerhouse was shut down, and he rented that to do his fabrication and design in. But right out his front door were all the commuter cars parked. So he tells stories. He'd go out with a tape measure at lunchtime and lay under people's cars and say, this is the front end would work. This rear end, you know, he looked at Corvairs in the parking lot and said, maybe I'll do it rear engine, maybe. And he said, no good. And then he came upon, I guess it was a 58 Chevy, and he said, this is going to give me the track I need.
Bingo.
And the rear axle, and it's going to be cheap. And that's how he did that. And I can show you the original transmission hanger where off the back of the dashboard, there's a cage he built that holds the transmission in the back. So the front of the engine is motor mounts bonded into the fiberglass, but the rear of the engine, the transmission, is hung off the back of the dashboard in such a way that it could break loose and the engine would go under the car, and the car would drive up over the engine in an accident. So I'm looking at this cage he built, and I realized that it's built out of angle iron, and it's got all holes drilled in it. I said, Dad, where did this metal come from? He goes, oh, I went out and chopped down some no parking signs in the railroad station because the angle iron was perfect to build the cage for the back of the transmission.
Yeah, you know what's becoming more and more apparent to me and more impressive over the whole story of this car is, like, some people have the ability to conceptualize an idea and get creative with the theory of a car or something they want to see come to fruition, but they lack the ingenuity or mechanical skills to do that. That's for someone else to come in. Somehow your pop had all the faculties to do this thing.
People say, do you miss your dad? He died a year and a half ago at almost 91 years old. And do you miss your dad? I said, I have my dad every day. Every day I go in the garage, and in a different way, because I have him, it's not finished, polished thing. It's something that his lifeblood went into and his designs went into. I have this, I have the notebooks, I have the literature, and it's my job to continue with it. Remember I was telling you about this?
Right.
The parking. This held the transmission base and bolted up to the top, to the bottom of the console, right where the dashboard comes down and meets the console. So this carried the rear of the transmission. This was the rear motor mount, and you had the two front motor mounts bonded in up front.
Raised.
Yeah, oh yeah, he brazed everything. He goes, I had the
Oh, wow.
I had the square stock in stock from the, quarter midgets and stuff like that. He says, but I needed something on top, and I went outside into the railroad station and cut down 2 no parking signs. He says it started to make, so that's the old no parking signs with stanchions.
Unreal.
So yeah, that was it. It's all brazed together. I wanted to totally change that design. And this is one of those things where I studied it and I looked at it and I started fabricating something else. And in the end, the 4-speed is carried by the same exact carrier. It's just a little wider and a little bigger. And it's the only thing that worked in that car. And he knew what worked and what didn't. So everything I've done with that car in restoration, or sometimes in thinking I'm gonna modify it, goes right back to the way he did it. The only thing is I didn't braze I welded it together.
That's awesome.
Yep.